morning, children. Let us start a new chapter, Heredity and Evolution. Heredity and Trait. Heredity, a recognizable feature of a human being or any other organism like height, complexion, shape of nose, chin, color of eye, and hair, etc. are called characters or trait. The transmission of trait from parents to their offspring is called heredity. The hereditary information is present in the gametes of the parents. Thus, gametes constitute the link between one generation and the next and pass on the maternal and paternal character or traits to the offsprings. Now, variations. The variations or the differences in the character or traits among the individual of a species is called variation. That is, the offsprings are never a true copy of their parents. They are somewhat different. There are many kinds of variation in human species like free and attached earlobes, different complexions like dark, light brown, dusky, whitish, fair, etc. Different eye color, brown, hazel, blue, green, grey, amber, etc. Height, some are tall, some are short. Chin, their cleft chin or pointed chin. Hair colors can be black, brown, blonde, red, golden, etc. Hair type can be curly, wavy, straight, etc. Nose can be snub, thin, pointed, etc. Accumulation of variations. The significance of a variation shows up only if it continues to be inherited by the offspring for several generations. The great advantage of variation to a species is that it increases the chances of its survival in the changing environment. When an organism reproduces, the offspring show minor variations due to inaccuracies in DNA copying. Those variations are less in asexual reproduction and more in sexual reproduction. Some variations are useful variations and they help the organism to adjust to the change in the environment. Some variation do not help the organism to adjust to the change in the environment and they may die and become extinct. Let's get acquainted with some of the terminology. First is chromosome. It is the thread-like structure in the nucleus of a cell formed of DNA which carries the genes. Second is gene. It is the unit of DNA on chromosome which governs the synthesis of one protein that controls a specific characteristics of an organism. Genes are actually unit of heredity which transfer characteristics from parent to their offspring during reproduction. Now, genes are dominant gene and recessive gene. Dominant gene, the gene which decides the appearance of an organism even in the presence of an alternative contrasting gene, is known as dominant gene. It is represented by capital letters. Recessive gene, the gene which can decide the appearance of an organism only in presence of another identical gene, is called a recessive gene. It is represented by representing with the small letters. Genotype, it is the description of gene present in an organism. Phenotype, it is the characteristic which is visible in an organism. First filial generation or F1 generation. When two parents cross to produce offsprings, their offsprings is called first filial generation or F1 generation. Second filial generation or F2 generation, when the first generation offspring cross among themselves to produce second generation offspring, then this offspring is called second filial generation or F2 generation. Transmission of traits. The characteristics or traits of parents are transmitted to their offspring through genes present on their chromosomes during the process of sexual reproduction. Gene works in pair. For every trait, there is a pair of gene, one dominant and one recessive. Each parent passes only one of the two genes of the pair for each characteristic. The offspring inherit two genes from each trait from its parent, but traits shown by the offspring depend on which inherited gene is dominant of the two. Genes. When a male gamete fuses with a female gamete during fertilization, they make a new cell called zygote with a full set of genes. on a full set of chromosomes. This zygote grow and develop to form a new organism having characteristics or traits from both the parents, which has inherited through the genes. The two genes or the pair of genes responsible for a particular characteristics are always present on the corresponding position of the pair of chromosomes. Mendel's experiments. Gregor Mendel was the first scientist to make a systematic study of pattern of inheritance which involved the transfer of characteristics from parents to progeny generation. Mendel chosen pea plants for studying inheritance because pea plants had a number of clear-cut differences which were easy to tell apart. For example, tall and dwarf pea plants. Some pea plants produced round yellow seeds while others produced wrinkled green seeds, etc. Another reason for choosing pea plant was that they were self-pollinating. Also, Mendel chose pea plant because many generations of pea plant can be produced in a comparatively short time span and their study is much simpler than that on the animals. First law of Mendel is law of segregation. Mendel's first law of inheritance or law of segregation is the characteristics or trait of an organism are determined by internal factor which occur in pairs. Only one such factor can be present in the single gamete. Law of independent assortment. In this law, it is the second law of inheritance. It is known as law of independent assortment, state that in the inheritance of more than one pair of traits in a cross simultaneously, the factor responsible for each pair of traits are distributed independently to the gametes. Now you can see in the cross, pure breeding yellow round seeds. RR capital and YY capital, it is the dominant. The gamete will be capital R and capital Y. And in the counter, pure breeding wrinkled and green seeds have recessive gene, that is small r and small y. When they are combined, the phenotypic ratio will be round yellow seeds, but genotypic ratio is capital R, capital Y and small y. When they are self-pollinated and double cross is made, out of 16, we get 9 yellow round, 3 wrinkled yellow, 3 green round and 1 green wrinkled. So you can see the gametes are independently assorted or they get separated or distributed independently because yellow can be with round and yellow can also be with wrinkled. Green can also be with round and green can also be with wrinkled. Let us understand when a plant having one pair of characters, example tall and short plants was crossed, that is monohybrid cross. Mendel selected pea plant having one pair of character, a tall pea plant and a short pea plant. He selected pure tall, that is capital T, capital T both, and pure short, that is both small t pea plants, and cross-pollinated them. He obtained all tall, capital T, small t in the first generation or first filial generation. When the first generation plant were self-pollinated, he obtained tall as well as dwarf plant in the ratio of 3:1 in the second generation or F2 generation. The ratio of pure tall and hybrid tall and pure dwarf was in the ratio of 1:2:1. The trait that is expressed in the F1 generation is called dominant trait, and the trait that is suppressed in the F1 is called recessive trait. Now you can see in the F1 or first filial generation or dominant characters are being expressed, and when they are self pollinated, then in F2 generation the ratio will be 3:1. 3 with dominant characteristics and 1 will be the recessive characteristic. So 3/4 of it is round and 1/4 is wrinkled. Second example he has taken of dihybrid cross when plant having two pairs of character. Example, shape and color of seed were crossed. Mendel selected pea plant having two pairs of characters, shape and color of seed. He selected plant having round yellow seeds and wrinkled green seeds and cross-pollinated them. He obtained all plants with round yellow seed in F1 generation. When these plants were self-pollinated in F2 generation, out of 16, 9 has round yellow, 3 has round green, 3 has wrinkled yellow, and 1 has wrinkled green seeds in the ratio that is 9:3:3:1. You can see the result of the double cross. And out of 16 you can see 9 is we are getting the dominant round yellow. Then independent assortment is there. 3 is with yellow wrinkled and round green, and 1 is of exclusively recessive character, that is wrinkled green. Sex determination in human being. Human being have 23 pairs of chromosome in the nucleus of cell. Out of this, 2 chromosomes are known as sex chromosomes, X and Y. The female has 2 X and male has X and Y chromosomes. The sperm and egg have one set of sex chromosomes. Some sperms has X chromosome and some have Y chromosome. All eggs have X chromosome. If a sperm having X chromosome fuse with an egg having X chromosome, the child will be a girl. And if a sperm having Y chromosome fuses with an egg having X chromosome, the child will be a boy. Variations may or may not help organism to survive. Some variation help organism to survive. For example, there are some beetles living in green bushes. They increase their number by reproduction. Crow can easily see the red beetles and they are eaten by the crows. During reproduction, due to some variation, some green beetles are produced instead of red beetles. The green beetles are not visible to crow and they are not eaten by them. Then gradually the population of red beetles decreases and the population of green beetles increases. This variation has helped the organism to survive. Some variation do not help organism to survive. For example, during sexual reproduction, a color variation occurs in red beetles and some blue beetles are produced instead of red beetles. Both red and blue beetles are visible to crow and eaten by them. Then the population of both red and blue beetles decreases. This variation has not helped the organism to survive. Acquired traits cannot be passed from one generation to the next generation. Example, if a population of beetle increases and the plants are affected by diseases, then the food available for the beetle decreases and their body weight also decreases. If after a few years the availability of food increases, then the body weight of beetle also increases. This acquired trait cannot be passed from one generation to next because there is no change in their genetic composition. Speciation, formation of new species from existing species. The formation of new species from existing species is mainly due to one or more of the following factors. They are accumulation of variations, physical barriers, genetic drift, natural selection, and migration. Let us see one by one. First is accumulation of variations. The differences between the individual of the same species are called variations. The accumulation of variation over several generations produce new species. Second is physical barriers. Population may get separated by physical barriers like mountain, river, lakes, etc. These isolated groups produce variations which can produce new species. Third is genetic drift. Natural calamities or introduction of new members of the same species in an area can produce changes in the gene pool of the population and new variations are produced which can produce new species. Fourth is natural selection. Only those individuals of a species which have useful variations and can adapt to the change in the environment survive and others die. These organisms can produce variations and new species. And fifth one is migration. Some individuals of a species may migrate to a new geographical area and adjust to the changes in the environment there and develop new variations and produce new species. Inherited and acquired traits. Inherited traits are the traits or the characteristics in an organism due to change in the genetic composition, and it can pass from one generation to the next and it results in the evolution. Means changes is at the genetic level and it passes from one generation to the next generation through gametes and it results in the evolution. And acquired traits are the traits which are acquired by an organism during its lifetime and it cannot be passed from one generation to the next generation. So one interesting example was that if we breed a group of mice and their progeny will have tails as expected. Now if the tail of these mice are removed by surgery in each generation, do these tailless mice have tailless progeny? So answer will be no, because since the removal of tail cannot change the genetic composition in the germ cells of the mice, so these traits cannot be passed from one generation to next and it will not result in the evolution. Evolution. Evolution is the sequence of gradual changes which takes place in the primitive organisms over millions of years in which a new species are produced. The more characteristics a species have in common, the more closely they will be related. Some important sources which provide evidences for evolution are homologous organ, analogous organ, vestigial organs, and fossils. What are homologous organ? Organ which have same fundamental structures but different in functions. Example, wings of bird, hands of human. Analogous organs, organ which have similar function but different in their structure or origin. Example, wings of insects and wings of birds. Vestigial organ, organ which are non-functional in the present day forms but were functional in the ancestors. Example, appendix, wisdom tooth, etc. One by one we will see homologous organs. These are organs which are similar in structure but different in function. Example, forelimbs of amphibians, reptiles, birds and mammals have similar structure but different function. For example, in amphibian or frog, it uses its forelimb to raise the front of the body. In reptile or lizard, it uses its forelimb for walking and running. In birds, forelimbs are modified in wing and for use for flying. And in mammals, the forelimbs are used as hand for grasping, walking, running, swimming, flying, etc. This show evolutionary relationship. You can see the same skeletal structure in all the cases and the uses of it is different in different group of species. Analogous organs. These are the organs which are different in structures but similar in functions. Example, wings of butterfly, bird and bat. They have different structure but they are having the similar function for flying. Third evidence is fossils. These are the remains of organisms which lived long ago. From the study of fossils, we can know their structures and the time period in which they lived. The fossils of complex and recent organisms are found closer to the surface of the earth and the fossils of simpler organisms are found deeper inside the earth. The age of fossils can be determined by radiocarbon dating. The study of fossils show evolution of simple form into complex form and their evolutionary relationship. Some of the pick of fossils you can see: tree trunk fossils, fish fossils, invertebrate fossils, dinosaur skull. Evolution by stages. Complex organisms and its organ develop from simple organism gradually over generations. For example, evolution of eyes. The eyes of planaria are just eye spot to detect light. It is developed gradually into complex organ in higher animals. Evolution of feathers. Feathers were first developed in dinosaurs and used for the protection from the cold. Later, birds used them for flying. Evolution by artificial selection. Human cultivated wild cabbage over 2000 years and produced different vegetable from it by artificial selection. Example, cabbage by selecting short distance between the leaves. Cauliflower by selecting sterile flowers. Kale by selecting large leaves. Kohlrabi by selecting the swollen stem. Broccoli by arresting flower growth. Evolution of eyes. The eye is a complicated organ which cannot be generated by single DNA change. The complex body organ of animals such as eye have been created in stages over many generations. First of all, the basic eye that first of all found was in the flatworm, which are simple eye spot which can detect only light. After this, more and more complex eye were involved in many organisms. The structure of eyes in each organism is different. The evolution of eye is example of evolution by stages. Evolution of feathers. Sometimes an evolutionary changes produced in an organism for one purpose later on become more useful for an entirely different function. For example, bird evolved feather as a means of providing insulation to their body in cold weather. But later on these feathers become more useful for the purpose of flying also. Even in some dinosaurs they had feathers, though they could not fly using feathers. Birds, however, adapted feathers for flying. The presence of feather on birds tell us that birds are closely related to dinosaurs. Natural selection. Natural selection is the process of evolution of a species whereby characteristics which help individual organisms to survive and reproduce are passed to their offsprings, and those characteristics which do not help are not passed on. The Darwin theory was widely accepted, but it was criticized on the ground that it could not explain how the variations arise. With the progress in genetics, the source of variation was explained to be the genes. Genes vary in natural population. Genetic variation is the raw material of evolution. So, Darwin's theory was modified accordingly. These days, the most accepted theory of evolution is the synthetic theory of evolution, in which the origin of a species is based on both genetic variations as well as natural selection. So, individuals show variation, some offer an advantage. It is naturally selected, so best suited are favored and selected. New generation is the variation increases in the frequency and survival of the new individual. This is the picture of Lamarck theory, that original giraffe was short-necked, ancestors are short-necked. They keep on stretching for the higher leaves on the tree, and they are generation after generation, the neck become longer. Evolution should not be equated with the progress. Evolution is not resulted in progress. Evolution has resulted in the formation of several complex species from simple species due to variations, genetic drift and natural selection. This does not mean that one species get eliminated and new species are formed, and that the new species are better than the older species. Species get eliminated only if they are not able to adapt to the change in the environment. Several species which could adapt to the changes in the environment still continue to survive. For example, bacteria. Human beings have not evolved from chimpanzees. They had a common ancestor from which they evolved separately. Human beings are not the pinnacle of evolution, but they are only one species among several evolving species. Human evolution or Homo sapiens. There is a great diversity among human beings in their form and features around the world. Human beings evolved in Africa. Some of them stayed there and others migrated to different parts of the world. Then, due to genetic variations and the environmental changes in different geographical regions, they developed changes in their forms and the features. This is the developmental history of the human. You can see it is expected From all, nearly all experts agree that Lucy was just 3 foot tall chimpanzee, and from this gradually the pecking man developed, then the Neanderthal man developed, New Guinea man developed, Cro-Magnon man, and then finally the modern man evolved. Origin of life. Darwin's theory of evolution tells us how life evolved from simple to more complex forms. And Mendel experiments gives us the mechanism of inheritance of traits from one generation to the next generation. But neither tell us anything about how life began on Earth in the first place. From this embryology picture, you can see how we have developed from our ancestors like lizard, tortoise, pig and human. You can see the early embryology or developmental stage they resemble, and gradually they develop into different forms.